No one anticipated that Coco Golf would ignite a global tennis craze. However, it is precisely what took place. One unplanned sentence destroyed the appearance of control in a sport that relies on discipline, stillness, and meticulously guarded protocols. What transpired was a collision of trust, visibility, and contemporary renown rather than a match, rivalry, or comeback tale. Unexpectedly, a private conversation between Tommy Paul, Eala, and Alex that was never intended for public consumption was broadcast on millions of televisions worldwide. Three young stars were pulled into a tempest for which none of them had prepared, but the shockwaves persisted for weeks beyond the brief period. It wasn't merely rumors. This was the real-time anatomy of a controversy. You must comprehend the weight that each individual carried into that moment in order to see why the reaction was so powerful. They weren't supporting actors. These names were associated with much bigger countries, aspirations, and futures than their own. Alex Eala was not just a gifted athlete. She represented opportunity in the Philippines. She won the U.S. Open Girls Singles Championship at the age of just 20, making history and serving as a role model for a nation lacking representation at the top tennis tournaments. Every time she appeared, it felt like a national event. Every point she scored felt like a team effort. She spoke attentively, smiled readily, and exuded a calm demeanor that concealed how oppressive the situation actually was. Tommy Paul was in a separate area. Before making his breakthrough, he was America's quiet contender, a player long regarded as gifted but unfinished. He was regarded as one of the best in the world and had a serene intensity that admirers respected. He kept his private life private, in contrast to many of his peers. No public romances, no dramatic posts, and no fake vulnerability. Control was the foundation of his identity, which made the events even more unsettling. The spontaneous footage that the cameras captured completely contradicted the image he had spent years trying to uphold. Then there came Coco Gauff, the voice that was heard by everybody. Coco was already a cultural icon and a Grand Slam champion, existing at the nexus of influence and sport. In a society where prepared responses predominate, she spoke candidly, responded truthfully, and presented herself as someone who wasn't scared to be authentic. She was adored by her fans for it. The media depended on it. However, authenticity comes at a price. And that expense became tragically evident one typical evening. Coco revealed more than just a detail when she talked without thinking. She unlocked a door that will never close. The scene appeared innocuous. A casual, informal post-tournament interview was broadcast live on several platforms. In order to provide a glance behind the curtain, these moments are intended to humanize gamers by allowing them to laugh after a tense time. Sitting comfortably, Coco joked with the interviewer while thinking back on her season, her development, and her connections while on tour. She naturally jumped into the subject of friendships among young athletes, discussing common experiences and support networks. Everything seemed secure. The sentence that altered everything then appeared. She mentioned a backstage exchange between Tommy and Alex in passing. She presented the little exchange as insignificant, intimate, and meaningless to everyone else. The change happened right away. The interviewer paused. Coco's face wavered, consciousness emerging too late. The broadcast made an effort to move on, but the harm had already been done. The moment before the segment concluded was recorded by viewers. Screenshots were shared on all platforms. Clarification could never generate speculation as quickly as it did. What precisely had Coco disclosed? What made her say that? Why did it seem as though it should never have left that room? The tennis internet was completely transformed in a matter of minutes. Questions proliferated more quickly than responses. Were Tommy and Alex romantically involved? Was there a relationship going on behind closed doors? Had there been a private incident backstage? Or was this just a hypothetical private conversation? The flames was fueled by silence. Tommy did not show up for his planned media engagement. Only a vague note regarding unavailability was issued by his team. Hours later, Coco released a mysterious message that offered introspection but no justification. Alex remained silent. The internet quickly filled the void with theories. The hashtag that surfaced was not limited to tennis. It quickly gained popularity and attracted those who had no interest in the sport, but a voracious desire for drama. Fans created timelines from stray images, replayed conversations frame by frame, and analyzed body language from previous tournaments. Evidence was recast from innocent exchanges. Moments of neutrality turned into laden symbols. The events were no longer the subject of the narrative. It had to do with what people wanted to think had occurred. The response was intense and defensive for Alex's followers, particularly those from the Philippines. Many perceived the incident as a betrayal and an unwarranted exposing of someone who had done nothing to warrant attention. Social media was inundated with comments accusing Coco of being reckless, jealous, and taking advantage of people's trust for laughs. There were lengthy threads that examined every previous exchange between the two women in an effort to find evidence of unspoken animosity. A story developed swiftly and obstinately. Coco was responsible for Alex's wrongdoing. Coco supporters retaliated with equal vigor. They maintained that there was no harm if there was no secret and that nothing really disclosing had been spoken. Some claimed that Alex's silence showed guilt and that being seen was what caused the terror rather than exposure. Some accused Alex of taking advantage of the spotlight, whether on purpose or not. The vocabulary became more severe. The argument became more heated. What started off as conjecture became into an assault. There was division among Tommy's supporters. Some said that he should have privacy and that it didn't matter what happened. Others voiced dismay and frustration that his on-court success might be overshadowed by off-court noise. A smaller but more vocal group created fan art, edits, and imagined plots that turned uncertainty into fantasy, romanticizing the whole scenario. Within their grasp, the lack of information gave rise to artistic freedom. Media outlets followed the momentum as they saw the engagement numbers rise. Boundaries, loyalty, and accountability were all questioned in headlines. Podcasts spent whole programs explaining a few seconds of video. Experts were asked to share their thoughts on friendship, trust, and psychology. Every perspective was examined, with the exception of the most basic one, which asked if the general public had any right to know any of this. National identities subtly but clearly entered the discussion, influencing allegiances and heightening feelings. People were no longer the only focus of this. It had to do with sides. The player silence became more noticeable as the noise level increased. The absence of explanation seemed confrontational in a society that is dependent on quick fixes. Some saw it as a tactic. Some perceived it as evasion. However, there was more going on behind the conjecture. 3 young sportsmen, all just out of their teens, were being made to face the fact that, in their environment, privacy was, at most, conditional. The lack of a clear criminal or villain made the situation even more unstable. There have been no violations of the rules. No agreements were broken. However, reputations were changing instantly. Sponsors kept a tight eye on everything. The public's opinion changed hourly. The story seemed to take precedence over the sport itself. Additionally, new fuel surfaced just as the original shock started to wear off, and some people thought the frenzy could burn itself out. Old pictures came back to life. Grainy pictures showing Tommy and Alex sitting close to one another, chatting, joking, and sharing a room. Moments of innocence recast as evidence. Despite the fact that nothing had been proven, the internet deemed the matter closed. One sentence had ignited the fire, which was now raging out of control. The prospect that nothing scandalous had actually happened, that the truth, whatever it was, might be commonplace, and that the intensity of the response revealed more about the audience than the actors were ideas that no one appeared willing to entertain. However, reason was not very powerful at the time. The narrative had eluded its authors. The strain behind the quiet grew as the world waited for someone to speak, implying that the truth would have to overcome a mountain of presumptions before it could be revealed. The clamor has not subsided 48 hours after the interview became viral on the internet. It had changed. What had started off as astonishment had solidified into anticipation. Individuals were no longer merely conjecturing. They were requesting responses. Tommy Paul, Coco Gauff, and Alex Eala's failure to explain themselves right away seemed like a rebellion in a society where silence is seen as guilt. The perception that something important was being concealed grew every hour without an explanation. The serenity that had previously surrounded their public personas seemed strange, almost suspicious, as though self-control had turned into a provocation. Coco's camp made the first formal move. Her management issued a calm, considerate, and well-balanced statement. It discussed the importance of friendships, regret for unintentional discomfort, private outreach, and the desire for understanding. It said all the right things on paper. In actuality, nobody was satisfied. The language was vague, did not include any names, and did not make it clear what had been mentioned on the air. Critics said it sounded more like corporate insulation than individual responsibility. It served as a reminder to supporters that not all errors call for public punishment. The ground was already trembling when the sentence dropped gently. Later, and even more quietly, Alex responded. There was only an online photo of her practicing by herself as the sun set and her shadow stretched across an empty court. No interview, no justification. The caption was a succinct, almost cryptic statement about attention and control. It wasn't a rejection. It wasn't an affirmation. It was a cue. Boundaries, however, are meaningless to an audience that feels it controls the story. Instantly, a tumultuous mixture of support, rage, pity, and entitlement filled the comments section beneath her post. Some advised her to maintain her strength. Transparency was requested by others. Many just wanted the narrative to go on. Her team made a conscious decision behind the scenes. They sent out a statement to Filipino media rather than foreign ones, reiterating that she was still focused on the race, that rumors would not be taken seriously, and that her personal life was not up to conjecture. Her youth, her right to privacy, and the unfairness of the inspection were all highlighted in the wording. It served as a subtle but potent reminder that there was a young woman navigating adulthood under close observation beneath the headline.